You know how it is you're trying to get a handle on something important, but you're just bombarded with information from every direction. It can feel impossible to know what truly holds weight.
Hmm.
Well, you sent us a fascinating book, David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity, and that's exactly what we're going to try and cut through today. Our mission really is to extract the core, the really mind-shifting ideas about what fuels all progress, from the first spark of invention to the, well, dizzying advancements we see now.
Absolutely. And Deutsch's central argument is that the driving force behind all of it, every single step forward in our understanding and our capabilities, is the relentless pursuit of what he calls good explanations.
Good
Right?
explanations.
It's not just about finding answers, but about crafting these explanations that have real depth, that can be applied broadly, and
Hmm.
crucially, that we can constantly improve upon.
Okay, so let's get into how Deutsch sees us, well, gaining knowledge. He challenges this common idea that we just sort of soak up experiences and then knowledge automatically forms. It's not as simple as just seeing enough apples fall and suddenly Newton's law pops into your head,
Right,
right?
precisely. Deutsch suggests that experience acts more as a selection mechanism. We, through our creativity and ingenuity, come up with theories, these potential explanations, and then our experiences in the world help us to, sift through them to see which ones hold up.
Ah, okay.
It's less about building knowledge brick by brick from observations and more like having a range of possible blueprints and then testing them against reality to see which ones allow us to build something that actually stands.
And this leads him to talk about justificationism. It sounds like he's not a fan of this idea.
You could definitely say that. Well, yes, in principle. It's about embracing the fact that we can be wrong, and that being wrong isn't a failure, but actually a vital opportunity to learn and to get a more accurate picture of reality. Deutsch sees this inherent openness to correction as absolutely essential for the continuous expansion of knowledge, the very infinity his book title refers to.
Hmm.
So instead of clinging to certainty, Deutsch argues that embracing our potential to be wrong is the very engine of discovery. It's a counterintuitive but incredibly powerful idea. Our mistakes aren't dead ends, they're stepping stones.
It feels like a sort of turbocharged version of the Enlightenment, where questioning authority became central. Deutsch emphasizes that the Enlightenment was a key turning point in rejecting unquestioned authority and knowledge.
Exactly. But fallibilism takes it a step further. It's not just about passively rejecting old, unfounded beliefs. It's about actively seeking out the weaknesses and flaws in our current understanding, even in the ideas we hold most dear, and be willing to revise them in light of new evidence or, crucially, better explanations. It's a really proactive stance towards knowledge.
Now, many people think of science as being primarily about making predictions and then testing those predictions. If they come true, the theory is considered good. But Deutsch argues that testability alone isn't enough. Why isn't just being able to predict things the ultimate goal of science?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Deutsch argues prediction isn't the ultimate aim of science. While the ability to test a theory through prediction is certainly a crucial tool for filtering out inadequate ideas, the fundamental goal is to develop good explanations that tell us why things happen the way they do, not just what will happen next.
Yeah.
He briefly mentions instrumentalism, the idea that theories are just useful tools for making predictions without necessarily reflecting any underlying reality, and relativism, the notion that truth is just a matter of individual or cultural perspective. Deutsch sees both of these as problematic because they undermine the core scientific endeavor of seeking genuine understanding.
Like using a map.
All right, think of instrumentalism like using a map. It helps you get where you need to go, but it's not a perfect one-to-one representation of the actual terrain. A good explanation aims to be closer to the terrain itself.
So, if a theory allows us to make incredibly accurate predictions, but doesn't give us any real insight into the underlying mechanisms, it wouldn't qualify as a good explanation, according to Deutsch.
Precisely. A good explanation has depth. It connects seemingly disparate phenomena under a single, coherent framework. It's also hard to vary, meaning that if you change even a small part of the explanation, it no longer works or it leads to contradictions.
Ah,
It should provide us with a genuine understanding of the workings of the world, not just a set of rules for anticipating outcomes.
mm.
And importantly, George points out that when we encounter contradictions within our existing knowledge, this isn't a cause for despair or for abandoning the pursuit of truth. Instead, it's a powerful signal that our understanding is incomplete and a clear invitation to seek even better, more comprehensive explanations. These robust explanations, he argues, are also our best defense against self-deception.
Okay, so we're aiming for these deep, explanatory theories, but how do we know if we're actually moving closer to reality? Deutsch mentions this idea that all observation is theory-laden. What does that imply about our ability to understand the world objectively?
Yet what's crucial to grasp here is that we don't encounter the world with a completely blank mind, right? Our existing knowledge, the theories we already hold, actively shape how we perceive and interpret every single observation we make.
So we're always wearing glasses, in a sense.
Exactly. We're not passively absorbing raw, unfiltered data. We're constantly filtering it through the lens of what we already believe to be true. This doesn't mean that objective truth is unattainable, but it does highlight the critical importance of being constantly aware of our own biases and the theoretical frameworks we're using to make sense of things.
This connects to our understanding of our place in the universe, doesn't it? Deutsch touches on the principle of mediocrity, which suggests there's nothing particularly special about humanity from a cosmic perspective, but then he offers a very different viewpoint.
He does, and this is a really pivotal point in his argument. While he acknowledges that in terms of sheer physical scale and prevalence, humans might not appear to be anything extraordinary in the vastness of the cosmos, he contends that our unique capacity for creating and utilizing knowledge makes us incredibly significant. He illustrates this with a powerful comparison. The vacuum of intergalactic space would be instantly fatal to us, right? But even a pristine, untouched environment like, say, primeval Oxfordshire wouldn't naturally sustain us for very long either. The comfortable and supportive environment we inhabit today is not a given. It's a direct result of human ingenuity, of the knowledge we have accumulated and applied.
So we make our own survivability.
Exactly. We're not just passive inhabitants supported by our surroundings. We actively create our own life support systems through understanding.
So we're essentially building our own niches of habitability in a universe that wasn't specifically designed for us. And he brings up this idea, attributed to Haldane and echoed by Dawkins, that the universe might be queerer than we can suppose. Does this suggest inherent limits to what we can ultimately understand?
It certainly acknowledges the possibility that the universe holds profound surprises, aspects that our current ways of thinking might not even be equipped to conceive of. However, Deutsch takes a more fundamentally optimistic stance. He proposes this very powerful idea that anything that is not explicitly forbidden by the fundamental laws of nature is ultimately achievable, provided we can acquire the necessary knowledge.
Wow. Anything?
Anything not forbidden by the laws of nature. Problems are an inherent part of existence, but he firmly believes that all problems are, in principle, soluble through sufficient understanding.
That's a very bold assertion. Anything not forbidden is achievable. So things like preventing asteroid impacts, mitigating climate change, even seemingly intractable diseases. Deutsch would argue that these are fundamentally challenges awaiting the right knowledge to unlock their solutions.
That's the essence of his optimism. He views humanity not as being passively supported by a finite environment, but as actively sustaining and improving itself through this continuous process of knowledge creation. This ability, this inherent drive to understand and then to translate that understanding into practical applications is what he sees as our true cosmic significance.
And that's unique to us.
Well, he also points out that, as far as we currently know, the only other process in the entire universe that generates knowledge is biological evolution.
Let's explore that connection between knowledge creation and evolution. Deutsch draws some compelling parallels between successful adaptations in the biological world and good explanations in the realm of ideas.
What's insightful here is the observation that both share a key characteristic.
Mm.
They're hard to vary while still functioning. Think about a gene that codes for a crucial protein. Most random mutations will likely disrupt its function, right? Similarly, a good explanation is robust. If you alter it arbitrarily, it loses its explanatory power or leads to contradictions. Both DNA and our brains, he notes, serve as general-purpose information storage systems, and the knowledge they encode tends to be remarkably persistent once it's established and proven effective.
He also emphasizes that the biosphere isn't perfectly designed, certainly not in the way a human engineer might approach a problem, and he briefly touches on Paley's famous watchmaker analogy.
Yes, Deutsch highlights that the natural world, while often exhibiting incredible complexity and beauty, is also, frankly, rife with inefficiencies and suffering, unlike something consciously designed with a specific purpose in mind. Regarding Paley's watchmaker analogy, the argument that the intricate complexity of the universe implies a divine creator, Deutsch points out a fundamental flaw. If the universe requires a designer due to its complexity, then what created the designer?
Right, the infinite regress problem.
Exactly. It undermines the initial argument.
He also brings in the historical idea of Lamarckism, the inheritance of acquired characteristics, and contrasts it with modern neo-Darwinism with its focus on the gene as the primary replicator.
Precisely. Lamarckism, while intuitively appealing in some ways, has been largely replaced by neo-Darwinism, which places the gene at the center of the evolutionary process. The primary goal, if you can call it that, of a gene isn't necessarily the well-being of the individual organism or even the survival of the species as a whole, but rather its own replication, its ability to be copied and passed on more successfully than its alternatives.
And this concept of a replicator isn't limited to the biological realm, is it? That's where the idea of memes comes into play.
Precisely. Richard Dawkins coined the term memes to describe ideas, behaviors, or styles that can also act as replicators, spreading from one mind to another. A catchy melody, a popular saying, a successful technological innovation, these can all propagate through a culture, influencing behavior and perpetuating themselves, much like genes spread through a gene pool.
Okay, so like a catchy tune getting stuck in your head and then you hum it and someone else picks it up.
Exactly like that. A good joke is another classic example.
This all seems somewhat concrete, genes, catchy tunes. But then Deutsch delves into the more abstract, discussing the reality of abstractions. He even points out that something as seemingly fundamental as gravity isn't considered a force in the way we might intuitively think about it.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. Einstein's theory of general relativity describes gravity not as a force pulling objects together, but as a curvature in the fabric of space-time caused by the presence of mass and energy. So in a very real sense, the traditional concept of a distinct force of gravity is actually, well, denied by one of our most fundamental and successful physical theories.
Whoa.
It illustrates the abstract nature of reality, where our deepest and most accurate explanations often move beyond simple, intuitive, everyday concepts. And while it might seem like a tangent, the multiverse idea for Deutsch kind of highlights how our deepest theories suggest a reality far more intricate than our everyday experience, reinforcing the idea that our intuitive explanations are often just scratching the surface.
He even mentions Hofstadter's idea of the eye as potentially an illusion and discusses the limitations of reductionism, the approach of trying to understand everything by breaking it down into its smallest constituent parts.
Right. Deutsch agrees that while understanding the fundamental building blocks of reality is absolutely essential, reductionism alone often falls short, particularly when we're trying to grapple with complex systems like the human mind, or when we're faced with practical decisions about how to act. Simply telling someone to follow the fundamental laws of physics isn't particularly helpful when they're trying to decide, what to have for dinner or how to raise their kids.
Huh, true. And this leads to a really thought-provoking point about the reality of concepts like right and wrong. He argues that the distinction isn't just a matter of social convention.
What's insightful here is Deutsch's argument that because the distinction between right and wrong appears within our best explanations for how to act, for how to solve those fundamental what-to-do-next problems, we have a compelling reason to consider it real. Abstract entities, like causation itself, are real in the sense that they play a vital role in our understanding of the world and can have tangible physical consequences.
Okay, that's a heavy concept. Now, moving from these abstract ideas, Deutsch discusses the jump to universality. What's the essence of this concept?
The jump to universality refers to the phenomenon where systems that are gradually improving in their capabilities suddenly achieve a massive increase in functionality, becoming universal within a specific domain. He gives the examples of the development of the alphabet, likely a single brilliant invention that then spread and enabled the universal representation of spoken language.
Like anywhere.
Potentially, yeah. And the evolution of numeral systems, culminating in our modern decimal system with place values and the crucial innovation of zero. This system allows us to represent and manipulate numbers of any magnitude using a finite set of symbols and rules.
Which unlocked so much in math and science.
Exactly. It unlocks immense power and flexibility. These universal systems are transformative.
And he addresses the long-standing analogy of the brain as a computer, agreeing with Searle that in some ways it's just a metaphor, but then pointing out a critical difference.
Yes. While in the past, analogies like the brain being similar to a steam engine or telephone exchange might have been used, a computer is fundamentally different because it is, in principle, a universal simulator. Given the right program, A computer can simulate any other physical system.
Okay.
Therefore, suggesting that the brain, which is a physical system governed by the laws of physics, should be capable of performing computations on par with what its constituent neurons can do, isn't just a loose metaphor. It's actually a consequence of our current understanding of physics. It's a much stronger claim.
He also revisits Lovelace's objection to artificial intelligence and Hofstadter's views on reductionism, suggesting that they both share a similar underlying misconception.
That's right. Both Ada Lovelace, who famously argued that computers could only ever do what they were explicitly programmed to do, and Douglas Hofstadter, with his strong emphasis on reductionism, seem to underestimate the potential for genuinely novel and complex high-level phenomena to emerge from relatively simple, low-level computational processes.
They couldn't see the forest for the trees, maybe?
Sort of, yeah. They both seem to hold the mistaken belief that basic computational steps couldn't possibly add up to something as sophisticated as consciousness or true intelligence.
This sets the stage for his discussion of artificial creativity. Despite the significant advancements we've seen in AI recently, Deutsch suggests that we haven't yet achieved true AI in the sense that Alan Turing originally envisioned.
Yeah, what's particularly interesting is that despite the impressive progress in areas like machine learning, Deutsch points out that if a task can already be explicitly programmed, it doesn't really qualify as intelligence in Turing's deeper sense. He even proposes a sort of inverse test. If we find that we cannot program something like genuine consciousness or true creativity, it strongly suggests that we haven't yet achieved a fundamental understanding of those phenomena.
Interesting. He's quite critical of the purely behavioral Turing test, the idea of judging a machine's intelligence solely by whether it can successfully fool a human into believing it's also human. Why does he find this approach insufficient?
Because, as he's consistently argued throughout the book, truly assessing genuine AI requires understanding the underlying mechanisms and processes at work, not just observing the superficial behavior. A program could potentially become incredibly skilled at mimicking human conversation through sophisticated algorithms and vast databases of text, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's actually thinking, understanding, or creating new knowledge in any meaningful way.
It's like a really good parrot.
Exactly. A very, very sophisticated parent. He draws a parallel to behaviorism in psychology, which focus solely on observable behavior while largely ignoring internal mental states.
So what is Deutsch's proposed test for genuine artificial intelligence? It's not just about its ability to convincingly impersonate a human, is it?
No, his test centers on the origin of the knowledge that the AI expresses. Did the AI itself autonomously create the meaningful content of its utterances, or was that knowledge ultimately designed and programmed into it by its human creator?
How would you even tell?
He uses the illustrative example of a program telling a joke. If the program was explicitly given that joke in its code, its ability to recite it isn't evidence of genuine understanding or creativity. However, if the program could somehow independently come up with a new joke or adapt an existing one to a novel situation in a way that demonstrates genuine understanding of humor, well, that would be a fundamentally different matter.
It boils down to whether the AI is truly generating novel knowledge, not just cleverly manipulating or regurgitating pre-existing information. And he stresses that becoming increasingly adept at imitating human behavior isn't the same thing as actually possessing human-like thought processes.
Precisely. Even with advanced techniques like artificial evolution, where algorithms are designed to generate variations and select the most successful outcomes, or sophisticated chatbots that utilize templates and statistical probabilities to generate responses, the creation of genuinely new knowledge isn't guaranteed. It might be that all the real knowledge creation still happens during the programmer's initial development phase, rather than during the program's subsequent operation.
This leads to his core idea that we are always at the beginning of infinity when it comes to the growth of knowledge. It's a remarkably optimistic perspective.
It is indeed. Deutsch argues that no matter how much we come to understand about the universe and our place within it, there will always be an infinite amount more to discover. We are perpetually only scratching the surface of the vastness of potential knowledge.
And the future is unknowable because of this.
Right. Because the future is fundamentally shaped by knowledge that has yet to be created, its specific details remain inherently unknowable, unlike predictable forms of randomness like the odds in Russian roulette.
And this underpins his principle of optimism, which is a very strong statement. All evils are caused by insufficient knowledge.
This is really a cornerstone of his philosophical outlook. He posits that every problem we face, every instance of suffering, ultimately arises from a lack of adequate understanding. While problems are an inevitable part of existence, he firmly believes that no specific problem is inherently insurmountable. Given sufficient knowledge, all problems are, in principle, soluble.
He even addresses Thomas Malthus's famous and ultimately inaccurate predictions about overpopulation and resource depletion, highlighting where Malthus's reasoning went astray.
Yeah, Malthus made a critical error in projecting future outcomes solely based on the knowledge and resources available in his own time. He failed to adequately account for the transformative power of future discoveries and technological innovations that would dramatically increase our capacity for food production and resource utilization.
He couldn't imagine future knowledge.
Exactly. It's a recurring pitfall. Underestimating the potential of knowledge yet to be gained.
And he uses the example of the threat of asteroid impacts to underscore the vital role of knowledge in addressing seemingly insurmountable challenges.
Yes, the potential threat posed by asteroid impacts is a very real one, but the solution lies entirely in acquiring the necessary knowledge and developing the technological capabilities to detect, track, and potentially deflect such objects. It's a stark illustration of how knowledge can be the crucial factor standing between us and, well, large-scale catastrophe.
So for Deutsch, progress isn't just a possibility, it's a sustainable and ongoing process driven by this continuous cycle of problem solving, fueled by a fundamentally optimistic outlook and the unwavering pursuit of better explanations. He contrasts this with more pessimistic viewpoints that see human activity as inherently destructive and unsustainable.
Definitely. He views the optimistic perspective, rooted in the Enlightenment values of reason and progress, as recognizing humanity's fundamental nature as problem solvers, constantly innovating and overcoming challenges. The pessimistic view, conversely, tends to portray humans as inherently wasteful, depleting resources and causing irreversible damage.
And static societies are doomed.
Well, Deutsch argues that societies that become static and resistant to new ideas are ultimately unsustainable, precisely because they lack the adaptability and problem-solving capacity needed to address new challenges as they inevitably arise.
Now, Deutsch also delves into some quite mind-bending territory, including a discussion of the multiverse theory. Why does he introduce this concept in a book about the beginning of infinity and the nature of progress? It seems like a leap.
It does seem like a leap initially, but what's intriguing is how the concept of the multiverse, while still a minority view within the physics community, serves to illustrate some of Deutsch's core ideas about the nature of reality and the reach of our knowledge. He uses the concept of fungibility, the idea that identical items are interchangeable and spheres of differentiation, to explain how seemingly random quantum events can lead to a vast and constantly branching tree of parallel histories.
So every possibility happens somewhere.
In this model, yes. He even touches upon how fundamental particles like electrons might be inherently multiversal, existing as fields that permeate all these potential universes. Ultimately, he views the multiverse not as a collection of separate, isolated universes, but as a fundamental structure defined by the flow of information, with our own observable universe being an emergent phenomenon within this larger framework. It really stretches the idea of what reality might encompass.
And this exploration of the fundamental nature of reality then leads him to a discussion of what he terms bad philosophy, philosophical ideas that actively impede the growth of knowledge.
Yes, Deutsch defines bad philosophy not simply as being incorrect, but as actively hindering the ongoing quest for better explanations. He uses seemingly simple examples like the assertion, "because I say so," which embodies justificationism and a confusion of authority.
Right, appealing to authority instead of explanation.
Exactly. And he uses this to critique more complex intellectual movements, such as postmodernism, deconstructionism, and structuralism. He challenges their central claim that all ideas are merely arbitrary narratives, arguing that this fundamentally undermines the very notion of objective truth and the progressive nature of science. It's a critique that, notably, also applies to the claims of postmodernism itself, which is kind of ironic.
He also takes aim at what he calls explanationless science, using examples like measuring proxy indicators for happiness without understanding the underlying mechanisms, or statistically defining heritability without delving into the actual causal pathways.
Yeah, what's crucial to understand here is that Deutsch sees a scientific approach that focuses solely on identifying correlations and establishing statistical relationships without actively seeking underlying explanatory theories as ultimately limiting and potentially misleading. While such studies might yield interesting data, they don't necessarily advance our fundamental understanding of why things are the way they are.
You just know that they're correlated, not why.
Precisely. And they can even reinforce existing flawed explanations by focusing on measurement over comprehension. He also offers a critique of positivism and logical positivism, philosophical movements that sought to restrict meaningful statements to those directly derived from sensory observation or verifiable through empirical means, basically saying anything else is meaningless.
In the later sections of the book, Deutsch delves into topics like choices, the nature of beauty, and the evolution of culture. He even touches upon political systems and the role of art. Seems like he applies his core ideas everywhere.
He really does. He brings in Belinsky and Young's theorem to illustrate that even in seemingly straightforward tasks like fairly apportioning seats in a legislature, there are inherent mathematical paradoxes, no perfect solution. Regarding political systems, he champions Karl Popper's criterion for judging good political institutions, the ease with which bad rulers can be detected and removed without resorting to violence. Based on this, he argues for plurality voting in advanced political cultures because it incentivizes politicians to seek broader support by offering better, more widely appealing explanations for their policies.
Makes sense. And art, how does that fit?
He challenges the common view of art as purely subjective and irrational, proposing that beauty can have an objective basis rooted in our evolved biology and the communication of valuable information. He uses the interesting example of our innate attraction to flowers, why flowers specifically, suggesting it might relate to objective signals of fitness or resources.
And he extends the concept of replicators from the biological realm to the cultural, discussing memes again, but making it a distinction between rational and anti-rational memes.
Right. He explores how memes, like genes, replicate, mutate, and evolve within cultures. But he introduces this crucial distinction. Rational memes rely on our critical faculties for their propagation and acceptance, like scientific theories or sound arguments. Anti-rational memes, however, tend to bypass or even actively suppress critical thinking, Thykmal, unsupported traditions, prejudice.
So some ideas spread despite critical thinking.
Or by actively discouraging it.
Yeah.
He argues that even in modern technologically advanced societies, anti-rational memes remain surprisingly prevalent, and that Western civilization can be seen as being in an ongoing and somewhat unstable transition from a dominance of anti-rational memes towards a greater reliance on rational ones.
Like a cultural battle.
In a way, yes. He uses seemingly trivial cultural conventions like changing fashions in clothing or home decor to illustrate the powerful, often unexamined influence of cultural norms. And he examines how anti-rational subcultures, such as those based on racism, can form and persist by actively discouraging internal criticism and dissenting viewpoints.
This then leads to a discussion about the evolution of creativity itself. Deutsch argues that creativity isn't just about generating entirely new ideas. It's also fundamental to how we successfully replicate existing memes, how we acquire knowledge in the first place.
Exactly. This is a really key insight. He argues that we don't simply learn and internalize memes by passively imitating observed behaviors. Instead, we actively employ our capacity for conjecture, criticism, and experimentation to understand the underlying meaning and implications of those memes.
So learning itself requires creativity.
Yes. Creativity in this sense initially evolved not primarily for generating novelty, but for effectively acquiring existing knowledge. However, the very cognitive machinery that enables us to do this also inherently provides the capacity for generating truly new ideas, a powerful example of what he calls reach, where a capability developed for one purpose turns out to have much broader applications.
Wow.
He suggests that this capacity for creative thought, rather than specific physical adaptations like bipedalism or language, is the most philosophically significant factor in human uniqueness.
Finally, he returns to the idea of unsustainable practices and reiterates his optimistic perspective, using the historical example of Easter Island and offering a critique of Jared Diamond's guns, germs, and steel thesis.
Right. He argues that the potential ecological collapse of Easter Island, if that's indeed what happened, wasn't fundamentally a failure of making initial mistakes, because mistakes are an inevitable part of exploration and innovation, but rather a failure to correct those mistakes in time, due to a lack of the necessary knowledge or perhaps a cultural resistance to adopting new solutions.
So it wasn't the mistake, but the failure to learn from it.
Exactly. He contrasts his optimistic view of humanity as fundamentally problem-solving with more pessimistic narratives that emphasize our destructive tendencies. He challenges Diamond's primarily biogeographical explanation for European historical dominance, arguing that it underplays the crucial role of abstract ideas, innovation, and the specific cultural and intellectual developments seen in periods like ancient Athens and the Enlightenment, the power of good explanations again.
So geography wasn't destiny.
Not entirely. In Deutsch's view, ideas matter hugely. He concludes by reiterating his core belief that sustained progress is indeed possible through the continued application of Enlightenment principles, a commitment to reason, criticism, and a fundamentally optimistic belief in our ability to solve the problems we face.
He even touches on some very long-term speculative concepts like Frank Tipler's omega point universes and the popular idea of the technological singularity and the emergence of superhuman artificial intelligence. But he ultimately argues that humanity's inherent capacity for universal explanation and construction means that a fundamentally superhuman mind, in the way it's often imagined, isn't really possible.
Right. His point is that we are already universal explainers and constructors, at least in principle. While AI might become vastly faster or more capable in specific domains, the fundamental nature of explanation and creativity might not be something that can be qualitatively surpassed in the way singularity proponents often suggest.
Interesting take.
His final message is that an infinity of possibilities lies before us. The fundamental choice we face, both individually and as a civilization, is whether that infinity will be characterized by ignorance and error, or by ever-increasing knowledge and understanding, ultimately a choice between decline and flourishing. And the key to navigating this infinite future lies in our unwavering commitment to seeking good explanations through the powerful engines of creativity and relentless critical evaluation.
So, to kind of wrap up Deutsch's profound argument, it's really that this ongoing, relentless quest for good explanations is the fundamental engine driving all progress in every domain.
Mm.
This requires us to actively embrace fallibilism, the understanding that we are always capable of being wrong, maybe even likely to be wrong, and to cultivate our capacity for creativity to generate new and better ideas, which we then must subject to rigorous testing and critical scrutiny.
Couldn't have said it better. It's ultimately an optimistic vision, one that views problems not as insurmountable obstacles, but as challenges that are inherently solvable through the acquisition and application of the right knowledge.
He underscores the immense power of human knowledge, not just to passively describe and understand the world around us, but to actively shape it and improve it.
And crucially, this is not a finite process with a predetermined endpoint. It is an ongoing, potentially limitless journey, truly the beginning of infinity.
So, reflecting on this incredible potential for the creation of knowledge, maybe a question for everyone listening is, what good explanations are you currently striving for in your own life? And what fundamental assumptions might you need to critically examine and perhaps challenge to unlock new possibilities?
Yeah, or perhaps, considering Deutsch's assertion that all evils stem from a lack of sufficient knowledge, what are the most pressing areas, either personally or globally, where a concerted effort to seek better, more comprehensive explanations could lead to the most significant positive change?
Definitely food for thought. We encourage you to delve further into David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity and continue exploring these powerful ideas. We'd love to hear about your own aha moments and any further questions that this deep dive has sparked for you.